Hi, folks. This is Abel James, and thanks so much for listening to the Fat Burning Man Show, where we talk about real food and real results. Today's episode of the show is with Jill Ciciarelli, and she's the author of the new book, Fermented, and we're going to teach you how you can make your own fermented foods right at home. Before we get to the show, just one quick request. If you like this show, please click the subscribe button to make sure you get all of our episodes, as well as leave a review if you haven't already. We really appreciate it. It helps us out in the rankings, and it helps other people learn about this show and get access to all of our free content. So thanks so much in advance for that, and on to the show. So Jill and I talk about how she got into the art of fermentation, what Italians can teach us about healthy eating, how you can follow a seasonal approach to fermenting foods, and how you can make your own gut healing probiotics at home. All right, let's go hang out with Jill. All right, folks, Jill Ciciarelli is a food lover, kitchen adventurer, board certified holistic health coach, and keeper of the blog First Comes Health. You can find Jill fermenting and experimenting in her urban high-rise kitchen in Pittsburgh with her husband, Brian, and Quincy, who I've been told is the sweetest kitty in the world. How's it going, Jill?
Great. And I will vouch, he really is. Maybe I'm biased, but he is sweet.
That's awesome. I've known some very not sweet kitties in my time, so that...
Oh, well, Quincy's tops. He's tops.
That's awesome. I hope he makes a cameo.
Yeah, he's right out of the shot of the camera, so he might get wild and wander in. So we'll see.
Let's do it. So let's start right at the beginning. What is the appeal of bacteria-laden food that's been sitting around for a while?
Okay, the appeal is that it tastes awesome. It's so tasty and good for you. It's good for your gut. It's good for your well-being. It's good for your mood. It's good for your skin. And to me, I don't need any more than that list of good things. I mean, if you're just in it for the taste, that's good enough. It's good stuff.
Yeah. So people might be a little bit freaked out at the beginning, especially when, they get started with Weston A. Price or paleo or something else that seems pretty benign on the surface. And then they start hearing about things like head cheese and fermented meats and all of this crazy stuff that basically, like, fermentation, we've been doing it for a long time, obviously, but it's something that people might not have ever really encountered, especially doing it themselves. So how did you get into it and get over that mental hurdle? I think you started early, right?
I did. I kind of actually came at it in a different direction. A lot of people hear about it and jump into it or find a recipe. I knew about it, heard about it, and didn't do it for a really long time. I kind of studied the craft for a while. I knew about different types of fermented food, and I read a lot of books on it and would follow other people who did it, but I wasn't doing it myself. And the reason, like you mentioned, because I live in a high rise, I have a tiny little condo here. I didn't think I had the room for all the equipment, and I don't have a garage or a root cellar or a basement or anything. I thought, I need all these things that I don't have, so this is not for me. But how I actually got into it was my friend Liz gave me a kombucha SCOBY. And at first she offered it to me and I said no. I was like, I don't have the room for this. I don't have brewing equipment. And she said, you don't need anything. You just need a jar and you're set. So I decided to give it a go. And after that I thought, gee, I really don't need all of this other stuff like I was in a way led to believe. So that's when I started getting into it. So I had been a student of fermentation before I actually was a practitioner of fermentation.
And you started out with kombucha and then moved on to what?
Just about everything else.
Okay.
Yeah. I went from there to, sauerkraut and yogurt, and I don't tolerate dairy very well myself. So then I tried coconut milk yogurt and just anything I could get my hands on. I tried to see what happened, and some were great and some were bombs. And that's the nature of fermentation though.
We had a few of those as well. I remember one of the first times we made kombucha, it went perfectly. And then the second time we made it, it was like basically one huge jar. We decided to make a lot more because it went so well the first time.
Right.
And one of the jars had tiny little fruit fly maggots in it. in the SCOBY. And then another one was covered in mold. And they were right next to each other. Like, how did we screw up that badly in two different ways this time?
Wow. Yeah. When it comes to kombucha, fruit flies and mold, as soon as you see that, you have to start totally over. So you had a double whammy there.
It was a double whammy. But it was weird because they didn't cross-contaminate each other. It was just like...
That is weird.
Yeah, like one was terrible one way and one was terrible the other way. But what's...
Usually... if a fruit fly lands in one, somebody's going to find the other one.
Yeah, you'd think so.
Yeah, weird.
But what's the best way to, if you are maybe on the fence about this sort of thing, maybe you've tried kombucha that you bought from the store, what's the best way to get started at home?
I don't think that starting with kombucha is a bad idea. A lot of people think, oh, well, there's the SCOBY to manage and whatever. But really, it's not that complicated, but I can understand people's hesitancy. It's a living globulous thing that you have to keep alive. It's almost like a little pet. So I can understand if you don't want to start with that. But yeah, getting started with any kind of sauerkraut or shredded vegetables, shred up some carrots, something that you might already be familiar with taste-wise, and just give it a shot and see how it goes. Especially fermented carrots, shredding up carrots and fermenting them. That's usually the first foray that I truly recommend, because it tastes not quite as strong and pungent as sauerkraut, but it's just as easy to make and it can be appealing to a lot of different palates.
Yeah, and I feel like carrots are pretty benign to most people at the beginning, especially compared to stinky things like cabbage and other things you can ferment.
Yeah. Plus, everyone already has carrots probably in their refrigerator.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people, I think more people have carrots than have cabbage. Not that cabbage is exotic, but yeah, you're right. It's more accessible. It's more familiar.
And absolutely delicious.
True. And pretty.
Yeah. So fermentation has been done, obviously, it's old. And you mentioned in your book, what's old is new again.
True.
Or some quote like that. And I really appreciated that because it's this thing that seems to be new and snazzy and weird now because it's catching on again. But it's not this weird, freaky thing. We've been doing it forever. In fact, we had to preserve food for a really long time. So can you give a brief history of what fermentation is and why we might have done it as humans?
Well, it started off as a way for people just to preserve the food that they had. I mean, not everybody had refrigeration. I mean, nobody had refrigeration at one point. Not everybody, even after it was invented and started to become a thing in people's homes or communities, not everybody had it. So it was a way to preserve food. It was a way to keep the good stuff of the harvest around for a longer period of time. So yeah, that's how it was a survival thing that people started doing it. And you're right, everything that is old is now new again. And one of the things that happened in the middle of writing this is that the New York Times came out with this list of like hot and trendy food trends of 2013, and fermentation was one of them. And I thought, oh, perfect. This is awesome. It's good for me, but yeah, I hope that this gets people interested in it. I think a lot of these, fermentation is ancient, but a lot of these even not quite as old food ways and food traditions need to come back, should come back. It's great.
Yeah. So what are some of the foods that are fermented that people who might be afraid to start with have probably already consumed?
Yeah. The big one is yogurt. Pretty much everybody's had yogurt of some kind. I get this question a lot whenever I mention to anyone, oh, I just wrote this book on food fermentation. And they're like, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
Is that like beer? I get that a lot. Yes, beer is fermented. Wine is fermented. Vinegar is fermented. Yogurt, sauerkraut is fermented. Corned beef is fermented. So these are very common foods that a lot of folks have had that probably didn't put too much thought into it that were fermented. The pepperoni you put on your pizza, if you eat pizza, is fermented. So common things.
Yeah, coffee. One of the pieces of your book that I really appreciated, though, was number one, the beautiful pictures by Bill, our friend Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. You're awesome, man. But also the piece on fermented meat I thought was so cool because I don't think about that very often at all, and it is something that you can do, making corned beef, whatever. It's really hard. I love corned beef. We always used to have it. We have some Irish roots, so we would always have it a few times a year. Just absolutely love it. But most of the stuff that you buy is full of MSG and chemicals and other junk. So making it at home is really appealing. How difficult is it to ferment meats on your own?
Well, fermenting corned beef is a snap to me. I think that's nothing because you basically have to clear out the real estate in your refrigerator. That might be the hardest part because I always have a lot of stuff going in there. So, um, yeah, to make corned beef, you need room in the fridge and some time. I mean, and basic cooking skills. So that's as easy as it gets. Making other fermented meats, however, gets a little bit more tricky. You're dealing with a lot of issues that could seriously make you sick or be fatal. I say in the book, you don't lightly enter into meat fermentation. This isn't something that you casually think, I'll do that this weekend and no big deal. This is something you need to learn about, study, be prepared for, have every bit of equipment assembled before you even think about starting. So it's more of an ordeal than, say, making sauerkraut or kombucha or anything like that. But the results are awesome. The results are just so tasty. I mean, I'm Italian, so, it's in my blood. I'm totally into this stuff. But making it's a little bit of a thing. So I do invite people to do it, but I invite them to go in it with their eyes wide open.
Yeah. So maybe a good way to get started is to get a charcuterie board or something like that.
Yeah.
So how do you make pepperoni? Like, I don't think a lot of people have thought about that. They might enjoy it, and they certainly had it many, many times. But what's the actual process that goes into making something like that?
Yeah, to make something like pepperoni or salami or anything like that, it's very similar to sausage making, where you mix up meat and fat and spices and whatever you want it to be seasoned like. And you also add dextrose, a type of sugar. You add that in there, and a bacterial culture, something that you want to proliferate and change the texture and the flavor of the food. You want to culture this bacteria in the meat. Back in the day, before we had packaged bacterial cultures, they were just flying around in the air. Charcuterie makers, salami makers, people who ran salumerie in Italy they used wild fermentation. They just used whatever was out there. It's a lot more safe to use a bacterial culture. So you introduce that into there, and the dextrose is the food for that bacteria. This sounds like it goes against our grain, but you let it sit out and you let the bacteria culture and grow, and then you stuff it into the stuffing or the casing, whatever you're making it into. And it has to be cured from there. You put it in a curing chamber and keep it at a specific temperature, humidity level, and let it go.
So what's actually happening to the meat while it's fermenting?
It is being digested upon by these bacteria. It is changing in flavor. It's changing in texture. It's drying a little bit. It's becoming more concentrated in its flavor. If you take a little piece of fresh pork and you eat it, it has a little bit of a flavor. But if you let it cure and let it ferment, it has a certain texture. But if you let it ferment and cure, the texture is totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the result of the bacteria's work.
Right. It's super cool. So you mentioned that you're Italian, and that you talk about in the book how that kind of equates to being a food lover. I think that's definitely something that at least the average American is missing in their life. We don't have those same traditions around meals or around food or around appreciating it.
I agree.
Can you explain what it was like to grow up the way that you did and how you think about food and meals?
Well, food and meals, it's central. I know a lot of other ethnic cultures have this as a thing, but I can only speak to the Italian perspective. It was what we're all about. I mean, my family loves to get together, and when we do, it's about what we eat. It's about preparing the meal together. It's about sitting down at a table and eating it together. And I'm very, very close to my grandparents. Recently, my dad's mom, who I was very close to, passed away, and I remember just saying, she can't teach me anything more. She taught me so much, and the appreciation for just the very basics of food, how to pick a tomato, how to care about your food, how to just be so particular about its quality. That's what she was about. And it just seems between her generation and my generation, that has disappeared. I mean, just the interest in quality, the interest in how well it's prepared, the interest in how much love you put into it seems to have been diluted somehow. And, especially my grandmothers have been such a huge influence but I think a lot of Italians and, like I said, a lot of other ethnic groups do too.
Yeah. It's not something that necessarily is unique to Italians as much as it's something that's missing from whatever we have going on.
That's true.
What do you think happened in between those generations? Because it is something that I think Americans used to have. I mean, we all pretty much came from different places back a few hundred years, right? And we tended to bring along those traditions, and a lot of those involved particular types of food and the preparation of them and the enjoyment of them as well.
Yeah. Well, what I think happened is I think, the American culture evolved and changed, and people like my mom were encouraged to not be in the kitchen and not worry about food. They were encouraged to go into the workplace. And even though my generation, I'm 39 years old, so people in my generation, of course, were encouraged to go into the workplace and have a career. But people of my mom's generation, I think it was almost expected. The women's movement came about and, you better go out into the workforce. And she did. And this isn't a slight against my mother, but she had different priorities. She wasn't thinking about slaughtering a chicken or canning her bounty from the garden. She didn't even have a garden. My dad grew some things in backyard garden, but it was more for a hobby and more for just, hey, we have some food. It wasn't for survival. And then I feel lucky because my generation has the flexibility and the freedom to pick one or the other or have a little bit of both. So I think that's why a lot of these old traditional food ways are coming back. That, it's cool to do what my grandmother did. Maybe it's not as cool to do what my mom did. I don't know, but I don't know. I think my mom's pretty cool, but yeah, I think that's why I have more of a choice now. People in my generation have more of a choice, and I can choose to can my vegetables if I want and still have a career. So
yeah,
that's just my guess. I'm no sociologist.
Well, how about this then? How do you reconcile those two things? Being able to do those traditional labor-intensive, time-intensive things like canning and having your own garden or fermenting, but also having, a real life, as we would call it, outside of the home, doing whatever particular job or hobby or organization you might be involved with. How do you do both?
How do I do both? I can only answer how I do both.
Yeah, how do you do both?
Well,
and writing books and that sort of thing. I mean,
well, canning and preserving and fermenting and making my own clothes, or that's not a necessity in my life. Mm-hmm. If I don't knit the sweaters for my husband, he's still going to have a sweater and keep him warm. I'm not doing these things out of necessity. I'm doing them out of hobby.
Yeah.
So I can choose how deeply I get into a hobby like canning or fermentation or whatever, or knitting or something like that my grandmother was into, because if I end up not doing it, I can go to the store and buy a sweater or something that's already preserved and canned for me. So I have a little bit more of a hobbyist approach to it. I don't need to do these things. I like to do these things. And I think in my mom's generation, she didn't need to do them, so she just flat out didn't do them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting because so my grandmother, she's turning 90, this next month, and she raised my dad, who was one of 7, on an old farm.
Oh my.
So basically my dad's dad was working on the farm all day, literally all day, from before dawn till after the sunset, and then some, and all of the kids were too. And we are always stunned by some of the stories that my grandmother tells about the hardship of of doing all of these things out of necessity, because she did exactly what you described. She was knitting sweaters and caring for cows sometimes that were sick, and raising all these kids that are running around, making sure they didn't kill themselves while she was canning and had her own garden. It's just absolutely amazing. But then, like you said, generationally, I feel like we're of a slightly different generation. I don't think that mine is that much better off. I think we're trending in the right direction, but we're still kind of missing that critical piece. What can we do to turn things around?
Well, I think, books like mine that try to bring that into a more modern setting. I mean, mine's certainly not the only book out there on fermentation. There are books on canning. There are other people besides me who are trying to put a modern spin on it. The reason I wrote this book the way I wrote it, and the reason I wanted it to look the way it looks, is because I wanted it to be a modern book for a modern person, somebody who chooses to ferment and chooses to do these types of things because it tastes good and it's good for your body, and it's interesting and fun, and it's a blank slate that upon which you can put your own mark. That's how I think it's going to come back and going to become more of a daily habit to a lot of people. I mean, no one wants to do something that they have to do or they must do to survive. So if you read a canning book or a preservation book of any kind that says, you need to get a barrel of this or that because you're going to need this amount of food over the winter time, gosh, that just seems so overwhelming.
Yeah.
I wanted to put a modern take on fermentation, and I think that's what will appeal to people our age or plus or minus, is the modern part of it. This is cool to do, and it's hip and trendy. Plus, it has these really cool roots and a lot of history behind it, and it's something that maybe somebody in my family had done. So, to me, I don't know, maybe I'm too modern, but I look at these old books and they have so much to offer, but I can't relate totally to the lifestyle that they might be talking about.
Yeah.
Which is why I approached my book the way it did, because this is an example of my lifestyle. I live in the middle of a city, and I live an urban life. And this is a reflection of that, and I hope other people can relate to it.
Yeah. That's very cool. So the actual time commitment to get rolling with this sort of thing is fairly minimal, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are some ferments that you can start and finish and be done in a couple of days. There are other things that may take a little longer. And, by the very nature of fermentation, there's not exact times that you can associate with it. And there's a lot of variables that affect how long something might need to ferment. And then there's also a person's taste preference. I might like a batch of sauerkraut that's fermented for a week. You may like it that after it's fermented for 5 days or 10 days. There's a little wiggle room in there. What was that?
I like it crunchy.
Yeah. So you probably would like a shorter ferment, because after a while it gets a little broken down.
A little mushy. Yeah. My parents do a lot of fermentation, and we did as well, and it's so amazing. It's living. It's different every single time you do it.
I know. That's something that I get a lot of questions about as well. I made this wonderful batch of something. I want to do it again. How do I do it exactly the same? And it's very hard to replicate something exactly how you did it the first time. Just whatever's in the air may be different. The temperature on any given day may be different. The raw materials that you use are different. I mean, even if you're using the same vegetables, one may have come from this farm as opposed to this farm. So there's so many variables that can affect. I tell people a lot to keep a log, write down everything, every detail, everything that happened, be as detailed as you can if you're looking to replicate things from batch to batch.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think it's kind of cool to, I don't know, it's like spinning the wheel and see what comes out. You never know. It's going to taste good, probably. And if it doesn't, okay, it doesn't. But it's going to taste a little different every time. I think that's exciting.
Yeah, that's part of the fun. We for a while there, for a few months, we were getting raw goat milk and making our own yogurt probably about once a week, and it was it was incredible. Every single time it was completely different. Not just like a little bit different, but like the texture and the composition and the little skin on the top and how much cream there was in each one. It was so amazing, but it was so much fun too, because I feel like food should be like that. Food shouldn't be the same cookie cutter thing every single time.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of picked up an appreciation for this from my dad. When we would go on vacations, family vacations, he would be like, we're not eating at McDonald's or any place that is a chain. We're going to someone's back alley diner. You never know what you're going to get. And I remember as kids, my brothers and I were like, oh, we wanted something where we knew what it was. But then as I got older, man, I really learned an appreciation for that. So yeah, like you never knew what you were getting whenever you opened up your yogurt maker or whatever you fermented it. And that's cool. That's exciting.
But it was always good. It was always like on a spectrum, but it was always good. It was never like weird or sour or disgusting or anything like that. It was all just like, it seemed completely different, but it was all in the realm of good. I think
all in the good side. That's good. Yeah. Well, whatever's going on with the goats, it was different from day to day. Whatever they ate, or too much, or too little, or whatever kind of grass, or cool stuff.
So one thing that you mentioned in your book is not just eating with the seasons, but fermenting with the seasons as well. Why don't we talk about that? Because that's like, you're right. Dairy changes even seasonally and based upon what they're eating and how much water there is and what the weather's like. Let's talk about that.
Well, I try to eat seasonally for a couple of reasons, and I think everybody ought to. I mean, first of all, it's cheaper. I mean, whenever I talk to my health coaching clients about eating better and eat more fruits and vegetables, I always get, oh gosh, it's so expensive. If you eat with the seasons, it's cheaper. Mm-hmm. Just if that's your only motivation, that's enough. But the stuff that you get when it's so fresh and in season is so much better than the stuff that isn't. You know, whenever I mentioned in the book, I used this example a couple of times. Right now, it's summertime and the sun is out and you can go and buy a tomato that someone grew like down the road and it's just like the reddest red and juiciest and awesome.
I just said that for lunch.
Oh, good for you. And so 4 or 5 months from now, you're going to get a tomato in the grocery store and it'll be white in the middle and it'll be mealy and it's just nowhere near as good. So yeah, I always tell people, eat with the seasons. It tastes better. The nutritive value is a lot better. It's cheaper. Plus, when you're fermenting, you're almost concentrating a lot of flavors. And if you start with something that has little to no flavor or a flavor that's not so great, you're going to end up with something that's not so great. So you want to make sure that you have the best quality stuff to start with, because that will only make your ferments or even whatever else you're cooking in the more traditional ways or preserving or anything, it'll just make it taste that much better.
Yeah. And being from an Italian family, I'm sure you appreciate the differences between the way that Europeans tend to shop and select foods, especially veggies and fruits, compared to the way that most Americans do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Italy, and it's just every day going to the market and figuring out only what you need today and just buying that. And there's just, at least in my experience in Italy, there's so much more emphasis put on quality and taking some care into selection of food and preparing it. And yeah, I mean, here I, live an American life. Sometimes I can't go to the market every day, so I'll shop for 4 or 5 days at a time. And, we all do what we can. But yeah, I don't know. I'm biased. I think Italy's the best ever, and the Italians are great. So aren't we all like that? I mean, you talk to any Italian, we all think we're the best.
That's so true. Well, it's interesting though, because it's something that's so common everywhere else. They don't necessarily consciously think of this as being around for health. The fact that you can just get fresh things that are in season, it just makes sense because
I know.
There's no other way to do it, especially when you don't have the ridiculous sorts of infrastructure that we have.
Right.
Or kind of large corporations pulling the strings, throwing money around. It's just like, if something was grown over there, it makes sense to sell it right here.
That's right. That's right. That's the thing I struggle with. I mean, I live in Pittsburgh, so from maybe May through September, we got a lot going on with produce. The rest of the year, not so much. So I really take advantage of it, which is another reason why I got into fermentation, because I thought I only have so much time. So people who live in other parts of the U.S., I think, might have more of an advantage of someone like me who lives in the Northeast where it gets gray a lot.
Yeah. I don't miss that.
No, I am sure not. I'm sure not.
But let's see, what else do we have? So you mentioned food safety, and especially safety when you're fermenting things. And there have been a lot of people, a bit of backlash actually in the paleo ancestral type communities about that are anti-fermentation, saying that the fermentation that we do today is fundamentally different than the one that we would have done 50, 100, or thousands of years ago, because the nature of our environment is such that it's full of toxins. We have these toxic molds that are around and all sorts of other chemicals and nonsense. What's your thinking on that subject?
Two things. One, you got to do the best you can. Yeah, there's the air is different today where I am than it was 1,000 years ago in the same spot. That's true. But that's not going to stop me. You just got to do the best that you can. I mean, I get a little discouraged when I hear that because, okay, yes, things are different, but it doesn't mean they're hopeless.
Yeah.
Yes, it's different. It's different. That's true. The whole food system is different. Everything is different, but we can't stop cooking. We can't stop preparing food. We can't stop preserving yes, it's different, but keep it going. The second thing I want to say about that is, and I add a little bit of this in the book, is not everything has to be a wild ferment. I mean, whenever you ferment something in a wild way, you're relying on the bacteria on the food in the air to cultivate in the food. So if you're making sauerkraut, you're going to want a nice clean jar, but not a sterilized jar. You're going to want to wash the cabbage, but you don't want to obviously soap it up and make sure it's free of any germs. There's going to be bacteria on there, and there's bacteria in the air. If people are really concerned about the level of bacteria or the type of bacteria in the air, then don't ferment using that kind of wild method. You can inoculate your ferments with starter cultures, which you can buy in little packets. You can use brines or juices or whatever from previous ferments. If you want to try to control the types of bacteria that you're growing, there are ways to do it. Mm-hmm. But I personally don't get too hung up on that. The world's different in many, many, many ways, but that doesn't mean we need to curl up in a ball and stop doing things. I'm just going to keep going.
I like that.
I don't know. Maybe people won't, but you got to keep moving forward.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. Sometimes it's beneficial to fight fire with fire, right? So we've advanced in technology, which has poisoned our world in a lot of different ways. But at the same time, now we have starter cultures. Now we have a way around all of this. But I think it's so interesting. I remember reading back on, I think it was the way that beer got started and wine and creating alcohol in the beginning. It was basically they would just leave things out and hopefully the gods would help them grow and turn into beer or whatever.
Right.
We've come a long way.
Fermentation got started. Someone forgot about something and they ate it anyway and was like, hey, this isn't so bad and I feel good.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I've made this mistake a few times, sometimes kind of out of necessity and other times just because I didn't think about it. But the quality of the water that you use in all these different ferments is very, very important. So what are the steps that someone can take to make sure that they're getting water that isn't destroying the foods that they're trying to create?
Yeah, well, the first thing I tell people is to have your water tested. If you're going to use water out of the tap, make sure you know what's in it. Mm-hmm. Things like chlorine, fluoride, that can annihilate fermented food. I mean, forget it. I mean, maybe that's a little too strong. It can really slow things down. It cannot give you reliable ferments. I'm sure there are people out there using city water and having some success with it. But again, quality gives you more quality. So these are things you don't want in your ferment. Mm-hmm. So just be careful. Yeah, have your water tested. If you feel like your water is pure and good, use it. If you don't, definitely get some kind of distilled water. You want to be able to do whatever you can to make sure these bacteria have every chance. You want to make sure that nothing is in the water that's going to kill them. Yeah. So yeah, use pure water. If you're making water kefir, that's the only asterisk to the rule, the only exception, because you have to use water that has a lot of minerals in it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people will have well water that will be very mineral rich, and that's really great. Or you can buy mineral water in bottles at the store. That's really great for that. Or you can buy like little bottles of mineral supplements you can put in your water. But in general, any other type of ferment, you want the cleanest, purest water that you have. So yeah, I mean, before I ever started fermenting, I made sure we get like a little yearly water report, what's in it. So yeah, pay close attention to that kind of stuff.
We just got that report, and I have an under sink filter.
Oh yeah.
The guy who was installing it told me that it filtered fluoride. It turns out that it doesn't. Like when I got this report, I'm just like, maybe I should just double check on this. And it doesn't. So we have another filter that we use on top of that. And you can really taste the difference. It's a fundamentally different thing. Yeah,
for real.
It's got like this sweetness to it, which is just totally awesome. Yeah, it's like the most delicious water ever.
I know. I was just going to say, it's weird to say, oh, this water tastes so good, but you can definitely tell the difference. I mean, yeah, and if people have really great water filters at home, use them. I mean, I have one. I use it anytime I make anything, fermented or not. I need to use some water. Yeah, I'm using it.
Yeah, awesome. So I can't believe it, but we're already coming up on time. Why don't you tell people a little bit about your thinking that went into your book, Fermented? It's totally awesome. I highly suggest all of you out there to take a look at it. Bill rocked the house with these beautiful, beautiful photos, which doesn't surprise me one bit knowing him. But
no, he's so gifted. Yeah, I mean, just the look of it. Whenever I was talking to Bill, I told him, this is how I want it to be. I want it to be, this is exactly what I said. I want it to be less co-op, more Apple Store. Not against co-ops, because I totally love my co-op. But, I think, and this is what I was referring to a little bit ago about kind of putting a modern twist on fermentation. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people who don't ferment at all or are not that familiar with it, or maybe even just a little bit familiar with it, think it's some kind of weird hobby and it smells and all of this stuff. And it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, it can be beautiful. It can be delicious. It can be healthy. I wanted it to have a very beautiful look to it, and Bill really hit it out of the park. I mean, I came with a lot of ideas, and he really carried it through, so I'm really grateful to him. But content-wise, I really wanted the book to be the book that I wished that I had. I wanted it to be a good guide for folks who maybe aren't feeling very confident about starting fermenting food and starting with fermentation. I wanted it to be comprehensive. I wanted to break down all these different types of ferments and then explain that, you have the basic methods down, but then now you can put your mark on anything. I mean, you can get a cabbage and make sauerkraut and that's all that's in it, or you can add anything that you want to it and get a little bit artistic, get creative. I wanted to push people in that direction to explore their culinary artistry and their imagination. So I wanted it to be basic, but I wanted to kind of say, but you can take these basic things and do these other neat things with them too. So
I love it. So where can people find your book, and what are you working on next?
They can find my book starting on August 6th in anywhere books are sold. So Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, your local bookshop, Goodreads. yeah, so anywhere books are sold, August 6th. I'm very excited. 12 days from today.
It's awesome.
So excited. And what I'm working on next, my first love with fermentation was kombucha. So I might think about taking that idea and other fermented beverages, because there are a lot of fermented beverages that I didn't even touch when I wrote this book.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully I'll have the opportunity to maybe explore that a little bit. So
Awesome.
yeah, I'm pretty excited. You know, you're the first person I've told that to. So breaking news.
All right.
I'm like, hey. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what'll happen, but that's kind of the direction I'm going. During this past year when I wrote the book, I have not taken it on any health coaching clients, so I'll probably start doing that again. And
Cool.
yeah, just enjoying the fact that I authored a book. That's pretty cool to me. So
It is
I'm
very
excited.
cool. Congratulations. And once
Thank you.
again, it's called Fermented. You folks should definitely check it out. It's one of the best books I've ever seen on the subject, and it's absolutely freaking beautiful.
Thanks, Abel. Thanks for having me on. I'm so excited.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. You're welcome anytime.
Oh, thanks. I want to be back. So
Awesome. All
even
right.
if we just chat.
Thanks again, Jill.
Okay, take care.